is Kurt Doolittle and Noah Revoy from Natural Institute. Noah was just making a point. I thought it'd make a great short.
Yes, the men and women who are unsuccessful with the opposite sex are acting or behaving as if they wish the opposite sex was more like them. And those who are successful with the opposite sex accept the differences, embrace them, and use them to create a more energetic and enjoyable relationship.
Now, I usually say that in psychology, in independent of the sexual relationship, simply the interpersonal relationship, especially in families, I say, all of human unhappiness is wanting other people to behave as you want to, rather than understanding their interests, basically, and in their incentives, so that they can behave like they want to. And so what we can do, though, is the thing is, it's really easy to only worry about how you feel and you are the one who's right. It's much harder to mature into the fact where you're like, okay, what's incentives and wants are you this person trying to fulfill? And how can I find a way to find them to meet that person halfway in fulfillment of both of our incentives. And this begins when you realize what yours are. And I think a lot of people are afraid to know what their incentives are because a lot of them aren't good.
Well, and that's part of it. And then a lot of people also, if they realize that a lot of their needs, they cannot meet them and they need to trust others to meet those needs.
Yes.
That terrifies them because they don't know how to pick someone to trust, whether that be a friend or a business partner or a spouse. And their inability to choose leaves them vulnerable. And so they want to pretend that they're somehow independent. It's where we get the excessive, what would you call it? Excessive individualism in the West. This is not traditional to us. This is post-World War II.
That's correct.
Fear of trusting each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have a bunch of reasons to not trust each other because we've broken integration, which was basically the process of getting us close enough in frame and interest that we could trust each other. But if you put too many people together and you tell them you don't need to share frame, which is basically the paradigm by which you look at the universe, at least at the collective level, and if you can't achieve that, then you're not going to trust each other, and there's a good reason, because you're not trustworthy in the pursuit of the goals that would be for a benefit for both of us. So you just all end up being a bunch of children running around saying, I want, I want, I want. And Brad and I have a bunch of humorous videos where I'm saying, we got to convert most speech, human speech, into this. I want, I want, I want. That's all it is, right? It is a very complex ritual of an elaborated arrangement to achieve that. But most of the time, that's what's going on. The problem,
and the greater the fear, the more elaborate the ritual becomes, because everyone wants plausible deniability. And the guy who just goes up and goes, I want that, he tends to get it.
Yeah.
Because he cuts through all of it. And also everyone around him recognizes that he has no fear. And if he has no fear, he's probably not a shady character. Because shady characters are afraid of getting found out.
Well, I mean, this is the whole problem with female indirect speech and male direct speech. Men retaliate dangerously and obviously, so being direct is more likely to avoid misinterpretations, right? Whereas females retaliate indirectly and by sedition and undermining. And so women are indirect because they don't want to produce the question. And so this direction, indirection thing works its way into all sorts of things, specifically relationships. And whereas men and women used to be taught, I'm kind of thinking it was more women were taught how to deal with men than men, and men were taught to deal with women a little less thoroughly because it's more complicated problem for women, I think.
Our great grandmothers knew more about sexual dynamics, how to get along with the opposite sex. They knew more about themselves.
Yes.
They were more honest about what to expect than any pickup artist or influencer or
Right.
manosphere. I mean, half of what I say are lessons I was taught by my grandparents.
Right.
So a lot of them by my grandmother. She lived a little bit
I was
longer.
thinking, like, what do you think? What do you think empirical means? Right? Most traditions are empirical, at least within the context of the polity they arose in. Right? They're evidence of accumulated wisdom over time. So the difference is that you would say, well, that means all these things are relative. No, it's because the higher the trust polity, the more they're like this crazy white stuff we have that is counter and hostile to the rest of the world, because all this truth before face is harder on women, of course, but it's actually what's made it possible for us to develop this high trust society. So if you say, well, so it's not that all of these empirical observations are relative. It's that they're empirical observations learned by grandmothers, are empirical, especially within a class, within a culture, and that the deviation from what we would call natural law, or the deviation from truth, is what causes those other cultures' norms, traditions, values, and wisdoms to diverge. But if you look across cultures at how men and women should get along, it's amazingly consistent. It's basically who are in the West, we have a longer tradition going back into our prehistory of women managing the farm while the men are away at war. And that since that's so universal, our women had higher social standing, right? Which is, I
Higher
don't,
agency to go along with it.
and right.
They needed to. The women that didn't lost their farm.
Right. So you had this, we've had this longer, so that the relationship between males and females is more of males are responsible for politics and economy, and women are more responsible for the home and family. It's not that men are always in control. If
No,
that,
and most men need to be managed in some way by a more wise, older, mature man who knows more than them. And when we talk about a patriarchy, it's not men in control of women. It's a small group of the wisest men who have authority because they're granted that authority, and they keep the younger men in check. They protect the women from the younger men sometimes, because young guys who are unattached can be a little wild. And it's not about control. It's about protecting people from things that hurt them and allowing them to operate within a safe limit.
Mhm.
And
And we're really
nowhere in
good.
the
The
world,
West is really good at
yeah,
taking male agitation and directing it to the production of a
yes,
commons, rather than directing it familism, tribalism, clanism, tribalism, and against the interest of the commons, right? And so we've had this tradition very long, but this idea that white folks are evil and Western civilization is evil, they're not. It's a very selective bias, especially when we learn from we're so good at learning from our failures, and not so many other groups are. Anyway, I don't want to make this long. I wanted to capture your insight there because when sometimes you and I will get in a conversation, it'll go on for 2 or 3 hours, and it really needs to be broken up into 12 clips, right? And today we're not trying to work on your book or anything else. We're actually working on a business issue, but as a product of a business issue, it came up. So I just want to thank you for all the wisdom you provide, not only to me, to our organization, to your clients, but that you share with the broader world. And I
I,
really
I
appreciate
feel
your
it's
insights.
I feel it's a debt that I have to pay that, because I know this and other people don't, it's my responsibility to share the information. Kind of like how if you're the first one to notice a fire, you have to call it fire. It's your job.
That's what a conservatives are. We're fucking white blood cells, right? I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. And we're supposed to be sensitive to everything, right? Because that's our job. I mean, it's like, think of it as, I always say that, women can be really real in public. They seem to be really focused on the person they're talking to, even if their kid's drifting away in a stroller, right? And so then you have guys like us, and we don't think about like the now, right? We're not in the moment, right? We're always saying in the context of the population over time. And so I just say that that's why I say there's a division of cognitive labor, which is divides time. And our brains are wired, especially between the sexes, but certainly within the sexes by time, and certainly by ability over time to basically create this beautiful map that covers space and time and space, time, and population with people who are watching for issues with it or issues and opportunities with it. So conservatives, we're a little bit on what we call the paranoid side because that's what we're evolved to do. It doesn't mean we have to always be right, but it does mean that I would say, you have the Naxalt problem, right? Whereas I was talking to a woman yesterday, says, well, this doesn't matter because only I'm doing it. Yes, I know, but only you doing it turns into only you's doing it, turn all them doing it, turn to too many freaking people doing it. And that's
I'm
what,
the only one murdering hobos. No one else is murdering hobos. We're not going to
right,
run
right,
like
right,
just because you're the only one doing a thing doesn't mean it's not harmful and wrong.
right.
You know,
So,
and allowing see that's why the on men we call it the patriarchy officially, but in older societies when the men were setting boundaries, we weren't telling women what to do. We were just saying that when you step out of those boundaries, we can't protect you anymore.
right,
You're outside of our sphere.
you're hurting the rest of us, right?
Yeah, or you're hurting the rest of us, and therefore we have to put limits on it. And if you read the old German records of the law, most of the time it was women going after other women that men were trying to put a stop to.
Yes.
Because women can be incredibly cruel to each other. And that's one of the worst things for a small community is for the women to have fallings out because they're no longer helping each other with the children, which means they're burdening the men, and it's a death spiral for the community.
Community. Well, I mean, it's the hen difference is that men discipline each other into position, but they preserve the strength of the team. Um, and for some weird reason, because this is happening my whole life, I feel it, but I never can really rationally explain it. Is if I get in a fight with somebody, I like them better after. I don't know
Yes.
why. I mean, you've explained this to me, and I don't want to go into it right now, but it's the problem. Whereas the problem with the female strategy is that they actually want to kill the other person.
Well, females are much more ruthless than men.
Mhm.
Much more ruthless because men have degrees and we'll go as far as needed, but no farther. And we're much more open to reconciliation because we actually need those other guys' help
Yes.
in the future. And so our job actually, especially if you're a leader, is to create reconciliation. Whereas with women, it's a switch. And if they decide that you're bad and they're going to disapprove of you, there's almost no way to fix that. They basically you're dead to them, and therefore they want you actually dead. And I've had women tell me that they want the undesirable men in society dead. And they said, like, and they're saying this without malice. It's like it's cold. And it's different way. Like we look at the undesirable men and we go, I feel bad for those guys. Is there anything I can do to help them? Women want them out of the gene pool. And here's why. Those men pose an existential threat to women. Because those are the men that are willing to go to desperate and dangerous and violent methods to reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the competent men don't have to do that. Our problem is picking which woman, and so we're not a threat. But that bottom quarter of the men, bottom quintile, women don't want those men around. And so they act in a very different way, but they also do that to each other. If they believe a woman.
Absolutely.
And the more beautiful the woman is, the more she agrees with me on this, that women hate beautiful women, unless they're beautiful too.
I mean,
And
you brought this up in the last short we made, which was that if you look at pictures of progressives, especially the radical left, they're extremely unhealthy, unattractive people. And we've known forever. I mean, I remember my mother giving me this talk in front of a 7-Eleven sitting in the car is, you aren't recognizing that, because I modeled as a kid and whatever, right? But I'm a fucking autist, so I don't know what they do. And so she said, you don't understand that you're good looking and that how much of an advantage that is in life, and that you really can't, when you do become aware of it, you can't abuse it with other people, right?
Yes.
And so she said, do you see those people out there? If they're not attractive or they're not desirable, she didn't use the word desirable, I mean, because I was like 12 when she's telling me this, maybe, right? And 14 maybe. And so she's saying that because people used to call me cute. I mean, I'd go to the freaking store with my mother, so hey, he's adorable. I mean, right? So it's like oh, I'm a short nerd. I mean, what the fuck? Right?
I look in the mirror and I just see I'm normal because I'm used to it. But I have women stop all the time to compliment me. And,
Yes.
I can imagine the guys who are, a level or two ahead of me. Um, that's the same thing as getting $1 million a year for doing nothing.
Right. And so, there's a
Goes to
reason
your head if you're
why
not careful.
conservatives tend to be better looking. Well, first of all, it's genes. And secondly, it's experience in life. And
Yeah.
there's a reason why the left isn't. And then you have people on the left who are, and I'm talking about the extremes. And then the difference between the center left and center right is really just a little gene influence, class influence, and life experience.
I find the center left and the center right are concerned about the exact same things.
Exactly.
And the center right says, I think the solution is to help people carry their responsibilities better. And the center left says, I think the solution is to make the responsibilities lighter.
Yes, exactly. That's the
We're
only
gonna,
difference.
yeah. And that's the difference. In both of those, it's just the father and mother solution.
Correct.
And I think that there is reconciliation in those two.
Hmm.
There's reconciliation between those two stands. And the main thing that the right needs to get good at is phrasing that to the left that, hey, we're concerned about the same things, but we disagree about how to solve it. Let me explain to you how my solution works. Okay, so this is not objectionable. And they start to see that our solution is the long-term one. It's a sustainable one.
Yeah, I've always felt that, the that people vote their pocketbooks, which is right, and people pursue their pocketbooks first. But once their pocketbooks are satisfied, that's when they pursue these moral issues. So I tend to lead, or at least in the Constitution, I led with the legal part, which is technical, but the part that people care about is all the reforms. Those reforms are going to make it so that we can live quality lives again. The only thing I'm worried about is we're making the what's been done to people, how unjust it is, so visible and so criminalized that they're going to want to use hanging trees
Mm.
when they realize it, which is, well, I mean, it's great. One of the principles of law is no crime, no law, no crime, right? That's not true for tort and civil matters, but it's certainly true. It's certainly true for criminal and matters that we prosecute with force. So my view is that we have to get attention with reforms and then get support with the what how it will affect people's lives for the better and bring this
Well,
on.
and the government really can do a lot very quickly when they want to. We see that in El Salvador, where they had the highest crime in the northern hemisphere, or in the Western hemisphere, and now they have the lowest crime. And that's in a period of, it's been like about a year since they've been doing these reforms. They've been planning it for longer, but it's only been a year since they've been implementing them. It took a few months to take the crime from the highest down to one of the lower ones, and then it's just been incremental since then. Uh,
It's
your
not
governments just don't want to do it because I don't think they like us.
well, they don't want to do it because of in democracy. See, this is one of those things. Um, I'm old enough that I know the cycles we go through where liberalization, criminalization, liberalization, criminalization, liberalization, criminalization. So we go through this fact because you end up with having a lot of people in prison that need to be there, frankly. A lot of people in prison that don't need to be there for nonsense, right? Um, and so you build up this resentment. There's resentment in the population one way or the other, so it forms this issue. But if you look at what El Salvador does, they've gotten to the point where they now have the evidence, right? In other words, it's one thing if you go up and down like this, you'll continue to go up and down. But if you go down and then up, you've created, it's sort of like having a war, people will remember it, right? And now they've created enough evidence by getting bad enough that, and the correcting it severely enough that it's created the lesson that needs to be learned. I mean, there's no
I
common.
talk about that all the time, that you need a psychological shock in order to be willing to make big changes in your life. Well, a nation getting a psychological shock, like 30 million immigrants climbing across your border, may make you decide that you need to make big changes. And I was even told that in Europe by people in political power that everybody knows this was a bad idea to let the entire third world in, but there's not been a sufficient shock yet to allow the politicians to propose removing all of the unwanted people.
Right. Well, I mean, and the more like, I mean, it's like, how do I say this without being a jerk? Like, I mean, I would prefer to live with a whole bunch of with a bunch of Protestant or Northern Europeans, right, in an homogenous society with high trust laws and narrow constraints on violations of the public trust, the public commons, whatever. I would like that. But on the other hand, I'm not actually a racist, or anything else. What I care about is, do you have middle class manners, morals, and ethics? Right?
Yeah.
In other words, are you responsible?
Well,
Right?
and also, I mean, depends on what sphere we're in, because if we determine racism as simply preference,
Yes.
there will be spheres in which our preference is towards our own race for purely racial reasons. And I even think race is too big. I think it even goes more detailed.
Absolutely.
We pick people that look like us to marry most of the time.
Absolutely.
My wife's Portuguese, but in bone structure and appearance and thought and everything, even my friend said, she's like the Portuguese you. And so we pick people that look like us. And we do that because our kids come out looking like us, which makes bonding easier, also makes bonding easier with our wife. But, I have great friends that are, for example, Asian, and I love the man, but neither of us want our kids to marry each other because we each want our kids marrying someone that looks more like us.
Actually,
so our
grandkids
look like
that's
us.
actually the problem. Is it's really a class problem, and secondly, it's what's the term? Miscegenation.
Yeah.
Right.
We just want we want our family to look like us. Most people do. And those that don't, this has been
Okay, I
shown in
want to
studies.
interject. There is some evidence to see. The thing is, you want to stay at the same level of neoteny. That's really the objective. So what you're saying is, well, I'm a highly neotenous Northern European, right? Northwestern European, right? Okay, that's true, right? Well, I mean, so what do you get with a highly neotenous Japanese woman or Japanese guy, right? So if you look at the reproductive results of highly neotenous East Asians and highly neotenous Europeans, it's not so bad, although there are some indications that it leads to slightly more mental instability. It's not a lot, it's very small, but
well, it's some of that is caused, I think, genetically, and some of that is caused by it's difficult, and this is from talking to mixed people. It's difficult for them to know what race they're in, so that they know which tribe to associate with. And the mixed tribes are often a bit iffy, and so they go home to their father's country, and they're seen as an outsider. They come to their mother's country and they're seen as an outsider, and it makes them feel like they don't have a home. And I kind of identify with that.
I suppose, I mean, that's my job is neurochemistry and your job is behavior. So I assume you're right, but as far as I can tell, there's a neurochemical reaction going on
Yeah.
there too. Because really, when we talk about inbreeding being bad, right? I mean, the Muslim marrying your father's
If you
whatever.
marry your cousin for 6 generations in a row, you're going to grow extra arms.
It's a problem, right? I mean, so that's why there's so many birth defects in that segment of the population, which is fairly obvious in the hospital records in the UK in particular, where it's been most markedly obvious. Um, but so when you have a small pot, but once you have around 1,500 people, near breeding, all right, that's actually good because it's more likely you're going to do two things. You're going to preserve a trait and you're going to exit a bad trait. Now, there's some traits that are complicated that get reinforced this way, but most of them turn out to be good. But when you start going long distances across it, people say, well, I love this stupid argument. Um, well, there's only X% of differences between human. Well, there's only fucking X% just us and chimpanzees, right? It's like we
You're
don't,
90% the same as a banana.
I mean, so when you say that, I'm like, are you stupid? So because all genes aren't equal, right? And the other thing is that you think the gene is like a manufacturing plant. It's not. It's a dance with the egg, right? The cell. And so there's a structure to this, the molecular chemistry of the cell, and there's a structure with the DNA in the cell, and there's a structure of the DNA inserted by the sperm into that cell. And it forms this elaborate dance that isn't like I'm manufacturing this part. It's more like I'm altering the probability of the production of this bias, right? That's what a gene does. That's why even though our genes might be different, I mean, you and I are both basically French, right? I mean, um, I can't admit that, right? I have to say I'm English, right? But I mean,
Just say you're Norman. That way you can be
I
French
say I'm
and
Norman. That way
same
I get
time.
away with it. Well,
Yeah.
if I'm Norman, then I'm basically Danish, because it's really what I am. I'm Danish, Northern French, and Southern English, right? So I get away with it by saying
Yeah,
Norman.
which is basically the mix I am too. Frisian,
So
Danes,
if you
German.
can't, this is like I love this stuff. Your genetic histories, and dude, you cannot tell the difference between someone in Southern England, Northern England, and vast portions of Netherlands and whatever. The difference with Netherlands is they have those fucking tall people that are really beautiful, and it's really humiliating when you're around them when you're a short little Breton French, right? I mean, all right, it's like you're gods, of course you are, right? But
Yeah, how do they get that tall and that good looking, man? It's not fair to the rest of us.
it's not fair. I mean, I was with a really beautiful woman. We were staying it's a fort in Holland, and the name is escaping me. But they have a lot of those old forts, and they've just become villages, right? And the walls are still there because they're on the waterways and whatever. And so I'm in there, and it's got and you can bring your boat in, and so and we're staying in this little beautiful, not really a hotel. It's like something between a B and B and it's only like 8 rooms or something or 10 rooms. We're staying in this place, and we go out there, and I'm sitting there I'm 5'7". Now I'm like 5'6.5". They tell me, or whatever, probably 5'6 1/4", and they don't want to insult my feelings, right? And I'm smaller than Tom Cruise, right? He's only like an inch taller than I am. And so I'm going with with Amanda, and she's like 5'3" or 5'4", right? And so we're sitting there, and this gorgeous Northern European blonde couple that's like he's like 6'4", and with a chest this big, perfectly done, because you know how the Germans are with their fucking hair, right? I mean, some of those guys, they've got the right glass. I'm so jealous. I mean, when I was in Ukraine, I bought all my clothes from a German company, and is this I was blonde, gorgeous, beautiful women, and they're joined by another couple that's almost as godlike as they are, and I'm like, I'm pretty happy with my genetic lottery, but there's evidence of genetic excellence here that I just can't fucking compete with, right?
I about 10, maybe more years ago, I had business dinner with two Norwegian ladies, and I came up to about their mid chest, and I'm
Wow.
five, almost 5'10",
Yeah.
and they were really tall,
Yeah.
really good looking, but they were like robust. Okay. They look like either any one of them could have fought a man. That's the kind of thing they looked like. We sit down to dinner. They each drank a bottle of wine and a couple of beers, and they were perfectly fine.
Fine, yes,
You
because
know,
they had
they ate two huge plates of food. They ate twice as much as me and drank twice as much as me, and they were perfectly fine with it.
yes.
And I couldn't believe it. And it was a business dinner too, so and they're perfectly happy, and they were so much fun. And it was just, it's like another species, you know, they're that capacity that they had for just enjoying their life like that. But it is interesting when we get out and we see how many different kinds of people there are in the world. But I do think sometimes it's the slightly shorter people that are getting everything done, because we're the ones that go, I'm not 6.5 feet tall. I better make up for it by being extra
Well, I
active.
mean, we got great data on this. I mean, I love data, right? This is what I do. So, a great data on this is that you have to make the numbers change because of inflation, whatever. So, this is a number from the early 2000s, right? But in the early 2000s, if you're under 5'8", you have to make an additional $90,000 a year for every inch under 5'8", right? To get the same guy you could if you were 5'10" to 6'1", right? It's a lot of money. Well, I'm a nerd, right? If that's what the data says, that's what I'm going to do, right? I mean, it's so that's what happens. So you do have to. But on the other hand, one thing I noticed, like I said, I'm not 6 feet tall. I can't run a Fortune 400 company. I
Yeah.
can't, because there's too much of that job that requires physical presence, right, with a peerage. So what I do, of course, is I beat people with my intellect, but that doesn't work in a position where there's enough of it has a political rather than empirical result. But if you look at all these shorter guys, if you look at all these small companies and these guys that make a lot of money, they're not the 6'1", 6'2", not all of them, but I mean, there's a dominance of this pursuit because it's the only domain in which it's purely based on your ability to perform.
Yeah.
And so when if you have this ability to perform in addition, right, which is the ability to handle political and sentimental and intuitionistic reactions, then you're good. So I just think it's
Well, it's the same reason we'll never have a short president.
exactly, yes.
We'll never have a short president, especially nowadays that everything is televised.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, that's why people joke about Barron Trump becoming president one day, because he's like close to 7 feet tall, looks like, compared to his dad. His dad's tall and he's
And
ahead above.
Yeah, this is interesting. Melania's from, that's a really good gene pool she's carrying
Yeah.
around with her. I mean, it's almost a crime she didn't have 20 kids, right? I mean, the illnesses in the royal family in the UK have altered the perception that royal families need to be small to keep the cost down because it's made aware of the risk of royal families being small. I was trying to tear this to what's Pearl's name? The redheaded chick, Pearl.
Oh, Pearl Davies.
Pearl Davies. Right now, I think she's hysterical. I mean, and I get her gig and or the business she's building. Her father's an accomplished businessman, so she clearly has this. I mean, she's not exactly from the lower ranks, but she gets this complaints about her looks, and I'm like, you know, I don't want to diss your illusions, but those like 6 foot tall redheaded women, that's what European aristocracy looked like a lot of the time, right? I mean, it may not have been all the women, but if you want to be a knight on and you want to produce offspring, they're going to ride horses and kick ass. And I'm like, you look at her, and I don't know what I'm not you. You collectively look at her, but I see the Queen Elizabeth, right? Because this woman is mentally competent, she's physically competent, she's socially and emotionally
Well, and she's
stable.
sufficiently disagreeable to enter into conflict.
correct. And
And
I'm like,
part of the reason I picked my own wife is that she is quite disagreeable with outgroup people. And
yes,
you know, I knew girls that were super agreeable, would have done anything I said. We're already doing anything I said when I asked. The problem is that I thought, I don't want to raise a bunch of super agreeable sons. And I don't. I got the most disagreeable three boys you can imagine.
beautiful thing.
And what's great about it is just like my wife, they're super disagreeable with the outgroup, and they're actually pretty cooperative on the end. They're cooperative, not agreeable. They're cooperative with the family, which is the perfect mix. And our ancestors looked at picking a spouse. Okay, sorry. Our aristocratic ancestors, and every European has some aristocratic ancestors,
Mhm.
looked at picking a spouse as a breeding program. Now, my ancestors, they wrote down exactly how to choose. In fact, the last entries before they stopped recording things were, we need to breed height in. Everyone was ordered to go and find a taller spouse. Even my uncle got a taller woman, you know, one of my uncles. And it was like, we need height in the family. We got everything else. We got the intelligence, the long lifespan, and the good health. Go breed in some height. And I grew up with my great grandmothers talking about good breeding. Like this was just normal, and them explaining to me how to pick a spouse based on what would produce good children. Nowadays, you get called a eugenicist for that. But it's just self-interest. I want my children to be the best they possibly can be. So I'm going to pick the best spouse I can. And nowadays, people tend to pick only for appearance. And then they end up with good looking but useless kids.
Mhm.
And I think part of the thing too, and people ask, why did the divorce rate with the boomers shoot through the roof? And even their parents were divorcing at a higher rate. And honestly, I think it's because we went from about 70% of men married to 87%. And that extra
Yeah.
13% for
So
the men
you're
that probably
saying
shouldn't be married.
he's saying was a false, the high marriage rate was a false measure.
Yes. We
Yes.
did that at the same time that we destabilized it as an institution. So we did the two things together. Men in the top 30%, it doesn't matter what the laws are. It doesn't matter what the culture is. They get married, they can make their marriage work.
Mhm.
Men in the bottom 30%, it doesn't matter what the law is like or the culture is like. They have an almost impossible time to hold on to a woman and keep a marriage together. And
It's,
so we look at the
hold
poor.
on, I just want to clarify because somebody wants to jump on this. It's actually the distribution of trait conscientiousness.
Yes.
The difference is that intelligence can compensate for trait conscientiousness, the absence of trait conscientiousness. So you get
Yes.
this thing where there are people who do fine in the lower classes. It's just that they only have one of the resources available, right? And which is they have trait conscientious. If they have only one, which is trait conscientiousness, they can do fine, and they do, right? But if they don't have trait conscientiousness, then they don't have the IQ, the class history, the family structure, well, the other necessities to bring it about. So, yeah,
Yeah,
you
and especially in a
I was
high.
just like, I
No,
want to
you're
have
right.
somebody, that's just one of my things is like, I can hear the little, in my ear, Talib says, I'm like, "No, Talib is fucking high. Okay. He's half right, like usual."
Well, and if you have a period of high instability, then IQ is a little more important than it was before because you can adjust to things very quickly. Because even if you have high conscientiousness, if it's extremely stable, you may be very concerned about doing the right thing, but you're not sure what that right thing is. And so we had this instability socially in the 50s. Even the 50s were somewhat socially unstable. It was setting it up for what
Mhm.
came next. And the 60s and 70s were incredibly unstable. And those that were intelligent enough were able to readjust how they were organizing their lives. But even high conscientiousness people were suffering from this. I'm going to do what my dad did because that worked. And then it wasn't working. And a lot of good people ended up with really difficult marriages. I think a lot of those people didn't end up getting divorced. That's when you hear about the person that, yeah, my parents didn't get divorced, but they didn't really get along because you get a couple of high
I
conscientiousness
mean,
people, they'll stick with it.
conscientiousness, you have high family responsibility, putting the family first. which of these are traditional and upbringing things. The thing is that the 72 is 70, 72 is really the breaking point, because at that point you have brought women, you've had the Second World War, need to bring women in the workforce. You've had the 50s, which basically raise people into middle class consumption, even if they're working class producers. You had the 60s show the influx of the Jewish Marxists activism on the society, using the blacks as the lever. And then you had the birth control come in, and the increase in the capacity of white collar jobs. And this is partly because of the capacity for debt expansion and credit expansion. So you have all these incentives to undermine the economic, the division of labor between the sexes. And so that now it's like, well, then you had the 70s and the 80s were times where two things happened. We intentionally moved business offshore to disempower the unions from their hold on the government. And this created a lowering of prices, which matched with the increase in debt in the Reagan administration, so that people could get more people into houses to counter the effect of the 60s and 70s. And then in the 80s, we had the 70s we had the crisis and all that stuff. In the 80s, we had the restoration, and then the 90s we had the recovery from the price drop made possible by the entry of cheap East Asian consumer goods, driving down prices. So we have everything fucking going wrong at once, except we like what's going wrong is that our capacity for consumption is rapidly increasing, and our dependence upon others to produce that consumption is rapidly decreasing. So, what happened in 2000, I was one of the people, the contrarians, and I realized I'm running a company. At that point, I am not looking to become a public figure. I'm only writing a little bit in blogs and things like that, right? But I'm saying that, but I'm also active in libertarianism and that kind of stuff. But I'm not writing like I do today. And there were a bunch of us who were contrarians that saying somewhere in here, about between here and here, this has to correct, right? This has to. And you had the okay, I forgot, I missed the post-Soviet thing, which was the big leap that made us crazy. And so then we had all this debt capacity increase, and now we have the college increase of debt on top of it, and because of the rise in college prices, and we've offshored the labor necessary to produce equal wealth without college, and we're bringing in automation that's going to wipe out all those girl jobs that have been in there that are largely content production for consumption. And we're rapidly running out of credit capacity because the boomers are now going to, instead of putting money into this system because of all this inflationary behavior, is actually leading off into a period where the boomers are going to be extracting that capital, which means the value of existing capital is going to go down. It's not going to go up. It's going to go down. So this is all going to equilibrate. And what you were saying earlier is that it's starting to become the breakdown, which started at the financial and strategic level, then the economic level, and then then the social level, then the economic level, and then the family level is breaking down to the individual level, which is why you're busy as basically you're a psychologist.
Why I'm busy, and what I'm noting is I'm hearing this from several people that live in extremely liberal areas, is that the moderate left is kind of over the craziness.
Yes, they are.
And they're starting to mock the extreme left, and the extreme left requires their support in order to exist. The extreme left won't admit that, but they can't exist without some support from the more moderates, or at least tolerance from the more moderates. If the moderates join the right in saying we won't tolerate behavior that harms children, for example, and many on the left are concerned about children. They're not necessarily evil people. Their ideas just don't work. But they are concerned about.
This is the feminine thing, right? The
Yeah,
feminine intuition evolved because children need time to grow. This is what it's time, right? So they're trying to moderate behavior, right? So that the people grow into it. The conservative is that once you're an adult, you're not, you know, we're worried about moderating your behavior because you're not going to grow,
yeah.
right? And so we want to regulate your behavior and establish limits. So of course, women with the left, which is the feminine cognition, is more concerned about harm care, and they're more concerned about giving people that potential. What conservatives say is once we've identified that they are demonstrating a lack of potential, what we need then is discipline, right?
Yeah.
So the conservatives say, no, bring back walking in line at school, saying the Pledge of Allegiance, right? Saying respect, speak, bring back the rituals that that use the social environment of the school or the church or whatever it is, the court. Bring back those rituals so that they don't require self-regulation, their intuition. And
I would implement nationwide the JFK youth exercise program that was tried out in California.
yes,
They were showing how many powerful people and industry leaders had been through that program in California, and a lot of them were saying that the self confidence they got by getting in that good a shape in their teen years is why they were. That's why I became an astronaut. That's why I led this
mm-hmm,
company.
mm-hmm.
And not only was it physically beneficial, it's the psyche of benefits they get from going through that difficult process. And the girls went through it and the boys went through. Everyone did different levels.
When I was 19, I thought I mean, I was in good shape. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not that, I mean, good shape for me, which means I'm fit and strong, right? But I'm not like bulked up or anything. Um, and, uh, and I thought I was invincible,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that's despite the fact that, all the difficulties with being an Aspie, the
Well, and
social.
a 19-year-old needs to feel that way because he needs to go out and do some really tough stuff,
Mhm, mhm,
you
mhm.
know. And right now, our 19-year-olds are afraid to talk to girls.
Yes,
You know,
weird.
people talk about, oh, what happens if we get into a
Well,
war
girls
here or
didn't
there
used
or
to
the other
be
place?
mean to
Who
you.
are we going to send? The guys that
Girls didn't
can't
used
talk
to
to
be mean
girls?
to you,
Hmm?
right? They didn't used to be mean to you. They'd go, no, but that wasn't mean,
Yeah.
right? I'm still
Well,
surprised the stupid shit I did in my teenage years to get girls, right? That I stopped by the time I was out of
but
college.
girls weren't mean to us. I think they were mean to some guys.
Okay.
And it's the same thing if we were teenagers again, they wouldn't be mean to us. It's the same reason why I will have an interview with a woman that I'm as a prospective client, and her feedback is that yeah, I treat men really badly. I'm like, I tell them you're treating me good in this conversation, so this isn't something that you can't help. And they always tell me the same thing. They say, yeah, but you're behaving properly, so you're not triggering me. You're behaving like a man, so I'm not being triggered. And what it is that boys today are so afraid, and women are triggered by men's fear, and they will mock you for it. So we'll say lack of self-confidence, but it's really the fear, and they will mock you for it. And if you look at, Germanic history, you have the women standing at the back of the battle lines, telling the men, encouraging them. But if the men start coming, but retreating, yelling at them,
Yeah,
and
well,
mocking
also
them,
you're
telling them
talking about it's a
get back in
recent
the fight.
manifestation that if a woman unjustly mocked a man, she paid
Yes,
for it,
yes,
right?
that's true too.
So
There was consequences for unjustness. Yeah.
so all right. So we always digress into all these infinite little
This is a
pieces.
great 45-minute short.
Right. I was trying to say, what was the original topic we started with that I asked you? I said, can we make a short on that? Well, I was really smart, and I've forgotten what it was already. You've
I
forgotten.
think I think our original topic was on replacing memes with other memes, and that if you believe
Not
some
memes, replacing
frames,
or
sorry.
it frames. So you have the
Yeah.
frame of feminism, which provides some sort of social, political, and personal framework with which to judge interactions with people and to pursue abstract ambitions, and that that a new frame needs to arise, and it probably will not be like most of the time they aren't a repetition of the past, but some reformation that includes the past plus some new interest. But so that's
I
kind of
think the big change that this new frame must have is the giving women who have higher agency the opportunity to use that agency. And I think this is the problem. We tended to treat and I've written about this for one of the earliest articles I wrote, was not to look at women's agency as a binary, they have or they don't have it. It's to look at it as a spectrum. And I think we're going to need to do this even with men, that you'll be allowed to be taken as seriously as your level of agency permits and your desire to take on responsibility. And if you don't want to take on
wait, let me ask
responsibility,
that, because the problem is, the frame by which women operate, the empathizing frame by which the feminine mind operates, not all women, maxes out at a fairly low population, right? And so, because empathy is a limited system, whereas systematizing is limited and downsizing. In other words, you can't systematize the individual, right? You have to systemize the population. And so you're still stuck with this. Is the feminine mind, whether in a man or a woman, competent to know the limits of his or her capacity to apply his or her intuitions and instincts to a category of problem? Nobody disagrees with women's influence. I mean, I certainly don't, with matters of locality. Matter of fact, I think that
and that'll be the limit. That will be where your agency only extends to the people you know, because you cannot, for most people, they cannot conceptualize things they cannot see.
right.
And so you and I, we talk about how to fix the polity over the next 1,000 years. What's the consequence of our action 1,000 years from now? But if you can only understand people you can see and interact with and have a personal relationship with, then that's the extent to which your agency extends, and that's the extent to which you should be taken seriously in matters. And if you can only see those people in the immediate, then that's where your opinion should be taken.
We want that in the immediate. I mean,
Yes. I
I'm
want my wife to worry about the starving baby and not be thinking about what the kid's going to do in college. Like, go feed the kid, he's hungry. Don't worry about what comes tomorrow and next week and a year from now.
even I would say, well, what I'm worried about is you can't generalize a feeling,
Mhm.
right? And men, we're pretty good at illuminating feeling from generalizations and just looking at outcomes of distributions. Whereas women, they generalize, I mean, empathize, they generalize, and they do a pretty poor job of looking at a distribution. Which is why, the easiest way to tell someone who's writing to you is the sex is that women will almost always demonstrate the Naxal-Axalt fallacy, which is they will look at an outlier and claim that falsifies a distribution, right? Or they will look at the center of a distribution or some part of a distribution and claim that denies the outliers, right? Or all permutations of this. Whereas guys, we just see a normal distribution and everything, and we're saying, well, on average, given the distribution of people, this is what's going to happen. Now, you might have a class interest in that, which we certainly do. I see that all the time. People are going to do this. Well, I mean, yeah, they are, but that's your class of people that you associate with. This class is going to do this. This class is going to do that. I mean, this upper class, they're going to fucking ignore the hell out of you and just keep doing what they're doing, right? So you can say that, well, the middle class would do this. The lower middle class will probably do it. The working class might do it, but the lower classes, they're going to take advantage of it and run up the costs like crazy.
Well, the problem is with the lower classes is even the men aren't fit for any say in the polity.
Yes.
And the way we have to frame it is not that you're not good enough. It's this is a burden which it's unfair for us to expect from you. So we have to start reassociating taking on responsibility for the commons with having a say in it. We used to have that. Even Switzerland had it up until recently. If you wanted to vote, you came with your weapon to the polling station. And if you didn't have your weapon, you couldn't vote because you had to, it was a way of showing.
Love that.
Yeah.
When you
Imagine
talk
if
to Swiss women about guns, it's fucking hysterical. There's no problem over there.
no.
It's like Southern
Can
women.
you imagine if American voting booths you had to show up in full battle rattle and you had to have your patch from your militia unit in order to vote?
Well, I mean, America is an economic world, country, and so and the English tradition, which is what they call the House of Commons, isn't very common. I mean, it means the people who own farms, right? I mean, they're responsible. So, which basically means business people, right? So, I mean, yeah, we should have houses based on responsibility. I wouldn't be a problem with having a lower house of people who are irresponsible, right? That's the wrong way to put it. Who lack the ability to demonstrate competency over more than themselves, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And
someone should be advocating for their interests.
well, the church used to. That was the church. So we don't think of the church as a branch of government, but the church did basically take care of the I was going to use the Greek term, the common people, right? The manor took care of other issues. The city
The
court,
manor was middle class, basically. What's what became the middle class.
right? And so you're trying to do is get everybody to use middle class manners, morals, and ethics, or as many of them as possible. But we have to understand that's a responsibility burden that not everybody is capable for. You can train most of them into the norms, right? But that doesn't mean you can train them in, well, not most of them, you can train basically everyone into the norms. I mean, it just depends on how much work you want to put into the training. The problem is you can't make someone competent for the responsibility, the scope of responsibilities other than the normative, right? You can be normatively responsible just through training because none of it's that difficult. I mean, it's just manners, morals, ethics. What do you call it? Cleanliness was cleanliness, the term for
Oh, hygiene.
hygiene and
Yeah.
dress. Hygiene, dress, manners, ethics, and morals, right?
Well, here's the thing too. I'm pretty sure the lower class doesn't want to care about the polity. I'm pretty sure they just want to have a beer and go to work or whatever they do and relax and not have to worry about it. And I think a system that's going to get support from them is one that says, we're going to make sure nobody interferes with your ability to live. And if
Right.
you're in real big trouble,
And
there'll be a
nobody's
safe
going to cast you. I mean, my problem with this whole fucking what people call capitalism is a beautiful thing, but that doesn't mean that capitalism, mixed economy capitalism, would exist everywhere because it's the only thing that can. So, I mean, I'd rather the state not run companies but be a VC. But on the other hand, when you get down to the equivalent of unions, which basically says you don't have to find your own employment, right? We will find you work, right? In other words, somebody's going to say, that's actually the burden,
yes.
right? I mean, right? That's actually the burden on most people. And if you can do it, not that an individual is just what matters, that you can build teams in this sort of thing, right? And it's the work product administration, except not quite as
Well,
lazy.
the union doesn't only do that, they provide insurance,
Correct.
they provide, there is a social aspect to it where somebody passes and the wives of the other tradesmen would go bring her food. That became an extension of an extended family.
The only issue I have with the
Keep your
union
trust.
is that they instead of being things to protect workers, in other words, basically a defense insurance organization, they became an offensive organization which sought to control prices and whatever. And that's not okay because we don't live in a world of the 17, 1800s where capital concentration is difficult to form. Once it's formed, it lasts for a long time. We live in a world where it's like when I told the Sarkozy government when they asked me to come to France. Like, I can't do it because I can't turn over staff.
Yeah.
You have. I'm in a business where people have to migrate rapidly between companies, right? Who specialize in this part of the technology world,
Yeah.
right? And so, because that's what a company does, you develop this sort of competency in this domain, and then this one, and then you're good in X number of domains, but you're not good in others.
Yeah.
right?
Well, in France and a lot of Europe, they want the idea that you own your own job. Well, that would be fine if you created it,
Yes.
but you didn't create it, and the specific thing you do it may not be necessary in the future. Now, like you said, it worked in the 17th, 18th century. Your job is making horseshoes, and no one thought the car would come along. So that means you're going to be doing that for the next 45 years.
You know, it's funny. Krupp, named Krupp. He's actually Jewish, but he became German, right? And he built the Krupp. That's where it's called the
Steel
arms of Krupp,
manufacturers, yeah.
right? But they became the people that the industry that built the German war machine, right? But when he's talking about originally, what he's doing is he's making. Well, this is where all these ideas come from. He basically made community housing so the families could be close to the work. So they could have wives and children and dogs, right? I mean, I don't know why the dogs were included, but it's very German in some way. I found it very charming. And then, what they're saying is, I need healthy workers who are stable and whatever. It's purely self-interested, but it was actually successful. But it's also, it didn't create the hostility that occurred in like England in industrialization, where the English tradition, which is if we were, say, stonemason, we would travel the country to the jobs all the time. That's one of the reasons England couldn't have the Industrial Revolution, because they'd had a mobile workforce already. And right, but in Germany they had they still had the equivalent of peasants, right? And so they needed to bring those people in, and they took care of them. But they had people that take. I mean, it's like people laugh at the Mormons, but if you look at what the Mormons do, it's not very different from what Krupp did in Germany with his people, which is they took care of you. They made sure your wife was okay, that your family was okay, that you were harmonious, that the community was okay. This is the company acting like a decent government, right?
Yes.
But right.
Well, governance doesn't require what we normally think of as a government. We have different levels of governance until the point where the family is. We talk about family governance, and I work with a lot of fathers about that. How do you govern your family better in such a way that it's just like any company, it's successful? What are your metrics for success in your family? And are you moving towards that? Because a lot of people are unconsciously operating their families, and then they're putting a lot of the weight of what should be solved at the family, social, community level, and they're trying to push that upward to an incredibly incompetent government at the top. And all they see is more power for us.
Well, the thing about what we call the civil society, which is what you're referring to, is the formation of voluntary organizations that produce community goods as a means of binding the community together by shared responsibility, which creates a virtue cycle, right? It creates a status and virtue cycle. So there's a lot of employment. There's a lot of people can be absorbed by that, which are currently absorbed by Netflix. Sorry, I had video games. Sorry, I had to say that. They could do that, but the difference is at some point you do need funding, right? But that's, as I say, the government as a venture capitalist, right, or a financier, in some cases, a charity financier, is fantastic. But it's when it's run as an institution that it's the problem. One of the things Brandon rails about is that a lot of small town governments, especially at boards of education, which eats most of the budget, they're run like little cliques.
Yes.
Right. But that's because they have authority. Right. And there's no one that can go in and throw them out. Right. Throw the bums out with these. It's a process.
Well, and even then, sometimes it would be possible for the locals to get together to organize and throw them out. And I've seen that happen in some towns. The city I grew up in Kitchener, we had 2 election cycles in which the old mayor didn't even have to run because no one ran against him. And the reason was they got desperate. They asked my brother at one point, because he was a businessman in the area and had been constantly going to City Hall complaining about them not taking care of the crime problems. And he asked, well, why isn't anyone else running when they came? He's like, yeah, this looks like a sucker's job. And they said, well, the problems are so bad that nobody wants the job because whoever gets in order to solve the problems, you're going to have to do things which are going to get you called a lot of nasty names.
Mhm.
We will get to a point where it'll be so painful that people are going to say, no, I'm going to go have to run my local government. This happened in the island of Madeira in Portugal. The same party since the revolution had the government. Same guy, like the same guy was president of the island the whole time. And then the locals on the island got so sick of it that the local businessmen all ran together. They didn't just fund each other, they ran for the positions. And they said, we're going to do 1 or 2 election cycles, kick out all the corruption, and then re-exit the government and turn it back over to regular people. And I was talking to guys, they're like, well, I was making 300K a year in a bank. And now I'm making 50K a year as a government employee in an elected position. But he said, I'll do that for 5 years and I'll take that financial hit because I don't want to see my home being destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so, I mean, here's the way I look at it is that, when they asked me to run for Senate in Washington, I'm like, first of all, I'll never beat these guys, but secondly, I'm not a politician. I'm an intellectual, right? Um, and they were just going around and asking. They were trying to find people to run, and uh, and you look at that and you say, well, that's true, but if you ask me to do it today, my time would be well spent on that. In other
Yep.
words, right? So I actually have this issue with young people in government, because it promotes a kind of behavior that is the reason we require certain ages of our federal officials. And you don't have the knowledge for it, and all you can do, and you don't have it becomes a career, right?
Yes.
Instead of a public service.
Well, the
Where,
Greeks, it was considered something to do after you retired.
yeah, I mean, I would, if somebody, I mean, I live in a tiny fucking town here. I mean, it's calling it more than a village is a compliment, right? It is a fairly, it's on the borderline of the backwoods of Connecticut, which is a very weird state because it's basically there's these highways and it's a shithole city after shithole city along the highways between Fairfield, which is okay, and between Springfield, which is not so okay. But this whole strip is like post is Rust Belt, borderline Detroit, not quite yet Baltimore, right? Shitholes from one end of the state to the other that only manage to survive because we have still in those towns enough white collar labor that precise technical manufacturing can occur,
Mm.
right? If you're willing to tolerate living with the kind of people that those virtuous people and quality people have around them, which is Hartford is an amazing shithole. Once a star of New England's,
Yeah, that's what I remember from when I was a kid. I heard it was a great place.
I mean, it had the first museum in the United States, the Athenaeum, right? It has this gorgeous Capitol building and these beautiful grounds. It has Trinity College, right? It's on the Connecticut River, and this is how progressives kill states, right? I mean, and the difference is Massachusetts. I wrote this yesterday. Massachusetts could, when I was in Massachusetts in the 80s, right? I was building a company up there. When the technology business moved from Mass, because it's when the mini computer or the microcomputer, which is what we call desktops, microcomputer business moved all to California. You might as well you burn the technology sector to the ground. And so you had guys that were making quite a bit of money, right? Trying to get basic, what I was trying to hire them for is programming, right? Basically just above minimum wage,
Oof.
right? And I had my choice of guys, career guy. I'm like, I can't work with you. I can't train you to think in the paradigm I'm working, which is I was working with the first relational databases and the first versions of, the pre-Windows, the first versions of compilers of IPX driver. I mean, they were useless to me, but they moved out there. And so prices of houses went down by a third. I mean, Boston got crushed. But what happened in Connecticut is they drove business out gradually. So the only things that are in the military industrial complex, like Boeing and Electric Boat and all that, and not Boeing, Pratt and Whitney, Electric Boat, and all those type of manufacturing companies are in Bay. Like one of my best friends runs one of my friends runs a manufacturing plant here. Um, they have a bunch of them, and they make freaking magazines for guns, right? I mean, they make everybody's magazines, which is hysterical, right? They make
I saw a plant like that making shells, and it
yeah,
looked like it was brought right out of the 1960s.
yes, yes. Well, I mean, now you
But
can. I mean, this is the
probably
thing
was.
is that these guys they're buying $10 million machines to do this stuff today, right? But if you go into lots of places, I mean, it's not exact. I don't know if you watch Pakistan cast like propellers or India cast like
In the dirt.
they just
In a hole they dug in the dirt.
it's it's 11th century bronze casting with at higher temperatures, right? I mean, I actually get a charge out of watching these guys. They're doing the squat and they're working with sand, and it's all over the internet,
Everyone's in sandals in the factory.
right? And
Nobody's got hard hat or shoes or
yeah, it's like hysterical. And I'm like, okay, well, there's parts of the industrial Rust Belt that don't look all that different from it. They have managed to largely get rid of the water wheels and the belts. And are actually working with electrical. But some of these places are terrible, and others are very modern. So they
Which is
try.
going to be funny if there was a major societal collapse. That'd probably be what save us is that really low tech manufacturing ability, allowing us to build back up the higher tech manufacturing.
You know what it is you can't manufacture heavy things.
Hmm.
So the truth is that because complexity requires markets, and in other words broad markets, and they require transport. You can't build expensive heavy things. That's why we get frustrated that a lot of the stuff we buy is light and not as durable. But if you want something to be heavy and durable, it has to be manufactured in a way and with people such that the transport cost doesn't eat the profits that you would normally want to gain from the thing. So it's just fascinating to
One of the trends that I saw discussed is there's a few economists talking about how we're going to start seeing, of course, we're already seeing a return of manufacturing to the US. A
yeah,
lot of it's automated, and that's why it hasn't affected the job numbers as much,
not
but
yet.
it is returning.
It will.
What he said along with that is that we'll go back to the kind of manufacturing we had in the 50s where things were built to last.
Yes, that's true. I
And
mean, I
so
put
he
that in
said,
the Constitution that we have to, so it better.
yeah. Well, it'll be a combination of things simply being built simpler, because a lot of the complexity now is about unnecessary environmental impact issues. But simply having the product last longer is better for the environment than it
Right.
being slightly more efficient.
We need right to repair.
Yeah.
Right to repair will drive out all the poor quality, right?
Yes.
And we need the inability to finance anything, or even on a credit card, that isn't durable for X number of years. If we
Yes.
do those two things, then you'll drive out all the poor quality. You'll drive up American quality again. I mean, because it wasn't. Truth is that it was never all that good it was just innovative, right?
I still remember, them talking about Cadillacs with a 2-inch door gap. Just
You
to
want a
drain
quality
the.
car. I mean, you look at a Duesenberg, right? On 1930, whatever Duesenberg, it's got, I mean, you could drive them today. I mean, the funny wheels and all, but I mean, the thing has turbochargers.
Yep.
It has all the modern technology except for the computer, right in there. And it's like, oh, well, we didn't build that. The Germans did, right? But we had the problem, which I don't think Europeans appreciate. I don't think the world appreciates, that we had a problem similar to the Soviets, but not quite as bad. So we had to fill up the country and move shit around the country with an industrial northeast or northeast. So we had to fill up the country, but we had time to do it. The Russians were trying to do the same thing. The Soviets, excuse me, not the Russians. The Soviets were trying to do the same thing in 2 decades.
Yeah.
So, so while we have this thing of we made big, heavy, durable things, but they didn't have to be high precision, right? And the Russians made big, heavy, durable things, and they had to be low precision and require a turnip head to repair, right? The Germans have, once they got their rail line, so they could communicate, they could actually move stuff around Germany. They could focus on what Germany has always been, not pretty always, but certainly since the 1300s, responsible for is craftsmanship quality engineering, which of course is why they had the second scientific revolution, not even England. England may have brought the first one, but the Germans brought about the second scientific revolution, which is of course what led to the American post-war prosperity. Is the Russians may have stolen all Germany's industrial equipment for manufacturing, but Americans got their scientists.
Yeah, the people are more important than the machines.
You can rebuild a machine. It's quite hard to rebuild an IQ point. So
yes,
I'm
going to have to wrap up, Kurt, pretty soon.
What?
I have to wrap up pretty soon.
This always happens. All right, so
we do an hour-long short.
We do an hour-long short. All right, brother. I want to thank you for this discussion today. I think the way I'm going to frame this short, we always get ridiculed over this. The video as what is the word like post-feminism?
Mm-hmm.
We'll start. Exploration of thoughts about about the world post-feminism. How about we do that frame?
Yeah.
Right.
Happier for women too. It's got to be. The only way it'll work is if it's also a better deal for women than feminism was.
Correct. Feminism has not been a good deal for women. It's like a good deal. It's like heroin is a good deal for a crack user, right? I mean, it increases your pleasure at the cost of long-term happiness and satisfaction. All right. I'm Kurt Doolin with the Natural Law Institute. I've been here with Coach Noah Revoy, or Noah Revoy, who can be found at noahrevoy.com. And we can find both of us at the Natural Law Institute. Thank you for watching. And Noah, I love you, brother. Thank you for all you do. You're a gift to not only those of us who know you and our organization, your family, but to everyone who works with you. Thank you very much.